Welcome to our webinar for March 2018 with beloved Judith Weaver. And tonight we're going to be interviewing Judith, who is considered among the mothers of the somatic psychotherapy movement. And she's going to be leading us through an overview of the history of sensory awareness and its role as a foundational building block for all of the somatic psychotherapies that have evolved and derived from it. And then she'll be leading the audience through an experiential process so that you can directly experience for yourself what it is like to be more in touch with your own sensory processes. And we will have time for questions and answers at the end. So as you log on and check in, if you have questions that you would like to have moderated for Judith to respond to, just click on the chat signal at the bottom of your Zoom page and you will see a white band show up on the right side of your computer screen, and you can start typing a question in there on the bottom right of your screen. And if you want to unmute yourself and ask a live question, you may, of course, do that as well. So I'm going to do a little introduction here of Judith, and then we will turn the floor over. So Judith has been working as a meditative practitioner and teacher, a student and teacher of Tai Chi, Qigong, and sensory awareness for 50 years. And she's also integrated biodynamic craniosacral, Reichian, Rosen method, Gestalt, and pre and perinatal therapy into her individual and group sessions and teachings and trainings. She's been a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies for over 25 years, and she's a co-founder of the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute and founder of its somatic psychology program, which is where I was blessed to meet Judith about 7-8 years ago now. She travels the world teaching workshops and facilitating private sessions. She works between the US in her private practice in Seattle and travels to Canada, Japan, and Mexico regularly to be able to lead groups through all these different methodologies that she is an expert in. And so, of course, she brings her own unique flavor to that integration. Judith has also been blessed with a private audience with the Dalai Lama and can share about that experience as well. One thing that I tell Judith is that in my doctoral program, she stands out as taking up so much qualitative experience for my learning there that I always remember having had a full 4-day weekend with her. But my classmates have to remind me that it was really only 4 hours that we had to sit one afternoon with Judith and be led through sensory awareness exercises and debriefing processes with her. But that was such a transformative embodying experience for me that it lives on as if it took up 4 solid days of teaching and learning with her. So I hope that those of you that are able to log in live today will check in and ask questions and invite her into your space so that she can take you where you need to go inside yourself. And we have Judith's website up here on the chat bar so that you can learn more about her at your leisure. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Judith so that she can give us some background on the history of sensory awareness and take it from there. Okay, my dear, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you for inviting me, although I've been a reluctant acceptance of this because I'm terrified of all of this technology. So here we are. And as I was preparing today for this class and looked again at the title, Sensory Awareness, the Basis of Somatic Psychotherapy, I thought, I think some people might challenge that, might not recognize it as basic. And so I do want to give some history and an explanation of how it works, how I work. And then we will do some experimenting. And then I'll give a couple of case histories, and then, of course, the questions that have come in and other ones that might come. So to start, We go back to Elsa Gindler, who was a teacher in Berlin, the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. Um, in Germany, they have what they called gymnastic. I think they still do. And it is translated as beautiful movement. And she was a teacher of this gymnastics. And after a while, a long while probably, she got tired of giving people exercises and techniques. And she wanted, she said, to help people find their own way. So she started exploring in her own way and helping other people explore in their own way. So Elsa Gindler was the start of this. She died in 1961 at the age of 76. Some people might know the name Heinrich Jacobi, who they met in 1924 and were colleagues. He was more of a musician. Feldenkrais studied with Jacobi. A lot of people have studied with Gindler, as I will mention as we go on. But one of the students that had most input, most effect on this work was Elsa Lindenberg, who was Wilhelm Reich's partner from 1932 to 1939 when he left and came to the United States. And with all the research we have done, it is generally agreed that she was the influence. She was a dancer, and she was the influence that brought Reich to include body in his psychoanalytic work, to work with the physical body, with the breath, with movement, with energy, with muscular armoring, touching his clients, and incorporating all of this into his work eventually came to cause him to be called the father of body psychotherapy, or quite frankly, the term that I would prefer is somatic psychotherapy, but there we go. Body psychotherapy is very popular and it works. Might explain more because a lot of people don't know what somatics is yet. So another student that had most of the effect on us was Charlotte Selver, who came to the United States in 1938. Quite a few other of Gindler's students also came to the US, but Charlotte is the one that we focus on and who was loudest, you might say. She lived in New York City and she taught at the New School for Social Research and did private session, and she called her work nonverbal communication. That was in the 1950s, and eventually changed the name to be called sensory awareness. Artists, dancers, psychologists worked with her in New York. It was quite a lively scene. Erich Fromm, one of the famous psychoanalysts, was a great supporter and a student of hers. And he incorporated her into a conference in Mexico in 1957. A book has come out of that conference, and it's called Zen Buddhism and Psychoanalysis. And the three main authors are Erich Fromm, D.T. Suzuki, who is the great translator of Buddhism into English, and Richard DiMartino. There were about 50 psychoanalysts and psychologists that came to that conference, mostly from the US and Mexico. Fritz Perls started studying with Charlotte Selver in New York City. Laura Perls had studied with Gindler back in Europe. And in 1947, he wrote a letter to his wife and said, and I'm quoting here, "Finally, I found for what I have been looking for all over the years, and what I did not find at any other school. Now this corroborates and underpins my entire theory." This is in translation, but that's what he said, and it really, really affected Gestalt therapy in many ways. You may know Alan Watts, who was, I would call him the popularizer of Zen to the Western world. And one day someone called him and said, "I just met someone who does what you talk about." And Alan started studying with Charlotte Selver. And eventually they did some workshops together. And he was the one who introduced Charlotte to Esalen. And in 1963, Charlotte Selver gave the first experiential workshop at Esalen. And that sort of was, the beginning of the boom, you might say. It influenced so many different practices. At that time, in the early 60s, there was a massage crew at Esalen, and it was mostly Swedish massage. But the head of the massage crew was influenced by Charlotte Selver and started incorporating some of this sensory awareness work into her massage and her teaching. And thereby we have this special form of Esalen massage. Authentic Movement, the founder of Authentic Movement, Mary Whitehouse, and Janet Adler both studied with Charlotte. Alana Rubenfeld, who calls her work Synergy, combined Gestalt therapy, Alexander technique, and sensory awareness, and created her form of work that is still very, very lively. Maybe the most lively one that most people will recognize is Peter Levine. And in studying with Peter, ages and ages and ages ago, one day he said to a class, my life and my work was changed by one day with this woman called Charlotte Selver. He didn't have the name quite right, but it was a one-day workshop that Peter did when he really didn't understand what was happening. And interestingly enough, so Charlotte died in 2003 at the age of 102. And in 2004, I was honored to be asked to be a guest editor of the United States Association of Body Psychotherapy Journal, volume 3, number 1. And it was all about Charlotte, different people. I mean, Peter's in it, I'm in it, various Margie Rand is in it. I'm told it's the only issue of the USAPB Journal that had to be reprinted. That's probably because I had all of my students buy copies, but great. I wonder if there's still some around. But sensory awareness is not a psychotherapy. Neither Gindler nor Selver were therapists. Many who were studying with them were either doing therapy or were already therapists. And they found a great basis, that term, in the sensory awareness work to add to their own work. So I'm just naming a few. I'm sure there are a lot more. I started working with Charlotte in 1968, and I trained in Reichian therapy in the 1970s, and it was impossible for me to keep those two important workings in my life separate. It just seemed to be so appropriate to come together. I wanted to share the simple, deep work with my clients. I do try to keep therapy out of my classes, though, when I'm doing sensory awareness classes. And just quickly, I had an extraordinary meeting with Eva Reich, who was the eldest child of Wilhelm Reich, 1985, I think. And she said, well, my dear, what do you do? And I thought, oh no, am I in trouble now? Because Wilhelm Reich never wanted his work to be named after himself. And we were all trained in Reichian therapy on the West Coast, on the East Coast too. And Wilhelm Reich only taught MDs. He wanted people to really know the body if they're going to work with the body. And we weren't that. We weren't orgonomous. So I remember tightening, or sensory awareness. I remember tightening, and I told her, well, I was trained in what we call Reichian therapy, but I also integrated into this work of Elsa Gindler and Charlotte Selver called Sensory Awareness. And she interrupted me and she said, oh, my father would be so glad. And I went, oh my gosh. So he knew about it, she knew about it. He had sent her to what she called a Gindler school, where she was able to crawl on the table, underneath the table, all around, and she just loved it. So that started our great period of friendship and mentoring. And often sensory awareness sounds like there's a lot of learning, but actually I quite think there's a lot of unlearning in sensing. There's no planned protocol. We don't do exercises. We call them experiments or explorations and invitations. And in fact, the first book on sensory awareness written in English was written by Charlotte's longtime husband, Charles Brooks, and it's called Sensory Awareness, The Rediscovery of Experiencing. And that's really what it is. experiencing and are connecting to our own experiences. So in this work, there are no wrongs. We're in the process of becoming more aware of what's happening, and everyone's different. So we will all have different experiences. The question is, how are you in your present moment? There are no judgments. Everyone has their way and are supported, encouraged to find their way. I have to admit that I have a prejudice against using the term body, because to me, it often creates a dichotomy, which is as great as using the term mind. In fact, I don't know, Karen, if you remember, but I used to start every class, at least it seemed like that to me, to state my prejudice. And I would say that body work is what I have done for my car. And this is not, this is us. Gindler, when she was asked what kind of work she did, she never named her work. She said, I work with the whole person. And with Charlotte, I worked with her for 35 years, from 68 to 2003. And she never really used the term body in class, except to say she wasn't going to use it, and we don't use it. She didn't use the term mind much either. There's a lot of labeling and sectioning, and sensory awareness, or just sensing even, is to bring the whole together. So it's not thinking, and it's not me telling anyone anything. It is about direct experience. And it's hard to talk about. I mean, when people ask me, so what's sensory awareness? I go, oh, yeah. And it's very, very different each time, of course. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I work, and that might make it easier to understand. I'll be talking about group work and working with individual clients, so I hope it's not too confusing. Individual clients, I do not ask them what they're feeling in their body, because I think that really sends them, that directs them to someplace. I try to be as open as possible, and I ask them what they're sensing, if they know what that is, if we've been working for a while, or what they're experiencing. And then I let them go to whatever it is that's acute for that moment, and hopefully we can work there. If I ask, what are you feeling? Often the answer is anger, sadness, whatever. And I can't know what that person experiences as their anger or sadness. I only know mine. So if I ask them what they're sensing or what they're experiencing, they might say a tightness in my chest, or heat, or shaking, or whatever it is. And it brings it down to a more simple level, and we can work from there. Also, if we don't focus on the emotional or interpretation of it, and if we go to the sensation, it often connects to an early experience or memory, which might be the beginning of the issue. And if we were naming it and interpreting it, we might be spending a lot of time on the effects of the issues. So sensing really helps us come down to the core, I think, more quickly and more simply. Often, not often, but sometimes it takes us even to a pre-verbal time, and they're just sensations, which we have to talk about, granted, but we know that that's a place for a beginning of a lot of our issues. So it's really nice to get there and be able to work with it through sensing, and not so much through talking. Now, in group work, I talk a lot and I ask lots of questions, and they're really just to suggest bringing your awareness to the topic of the area. There may not be any answers, and that's all right. That's no problem there. In group work, if I'm usually just scanning the group and seeing what needs to happen next, which is what I'm not going to be able to do here, which may drive me nuts. But anyway, if I'm going ahead and leading the group, or trying to lead the group somewhere, and someone wants to stay with whatever they're working on, sensing, that's perfectly all right. A big focus for me is to encourage clients and students to find their own tempo, to work in their own way, to stay true to their own natures. So, and at the end of this series of guided invitations, I might call them, and I've never thought of that term before, as sort of neat. I ask students if they want to say anything, anything of interest, anything that they want to share, or anything that was meaningful to them. It's not necessary to speak, but speaking might help the integration. Sometimes we go really deeply into sensing, and speaking does integrate the mind with the body, with the sensing, with the everything. And it might bring more understanding. In a group, if someone says something, it might affect someone else who forgot that they had that similar experience or something like that. So the talking after the fact is often very, very valuable. So this work is really, I think, about experiencing and integration when appropriate. And again, I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I would love to do some sensing.
This is a really helpful overview, Judith, and I'm so grateful for your depth of familiarity with the material to be able to just give a full rundown that clearly without needing to reference notes. And so you're giving the audience a very grounded reason for why it is that you've been chosen as the USABP's Lifetime Achievement Award honoree this year, and we're so looking forward to seeing you at the conference Pacifica in November, because you have carried forward this foundational work from the founding mothers and fathers, and you're paying it forward for future generations by keeping it alive and moving it around the world through your approachable and loving presence, so that so many people are drawn to you and want to learn how to reintegrate with themselves and come home to themselves. So I do see that we have 26 folks live here. I'm wondering for participants if you can toggle your cursor over your Zoom panel and click on your video on the bottom left corner of your panel so that we can see you. That would make it easier for Judith to be able to track the attendees and what your needs are. And meanwhile, please feel free to type in any questions you have in the chat box so that we can make sure to funnel those to Judith in right timing. So I will turn the floor back over to you, and you can lead and experiment with everybody here, and I will stay muted and just make sure that as questions are coming in that people can check in with you.
Great, thank you. Okay for me to go now? Okay. So I've been talking a lot, and I'm wondering what any of you have been aware of as I've been talking. What have you been aware of in yourself? Most of you, I'm guessing that you're sitting. Have you been aware of your sitting, or how comfortable or uncomfortable it is? Or now that I mention it, maybe you're feeling uncomfortable, or notice that you're comfortable. Can you feel your weight? We work a lot in sensing with weight, with gravity. What do you feel in yourself now? You might be sitting more to one side or the other, or just feeling your buttocks, whether you're sitting on a chair or a couch. Is there more pressure in one area than another? Are you comfortable? And if you're not comfortable, what can you do to make yourself more comfortable? Please feel free to change, to move, to do whatever you need. And actually, quite frankly, I see someone is asking if you can increase my volume. If I lean forward, will that do anything? Anyway, I think that most of us move from one uncomfortable position to another uncomfortable position, and we go on and move a lot, but we really, really often don't get to a place that is really optimum for us. So I just invite you to see if you can, or enjoy the fact that you don't need to, that you sat well this almost half hour and everything is feeling right to you. I'm now leaning more forward because I'm trying to get louder. I don't know if that's doing anything. So, how are you aware of your breath? Or are you aware of your breath? And now that I mentioned it, you might be more aware of your breath. And and what is your experience with it? Where is it in you that you can feel the movement of your breathing? And you might not. And that's okay too. Feeling is feeling. There's nothing, 100% right or perfect about it. It's just what we are as we are right now. So, can you feel places in you that where you can feel the movement of your breathing? And maybe are there places where you cannot feel any movement of your breathing? Just notice. So I'm going to invite you now to take your hand and bring it to contact with you someplace where you do feel the movement of your breath, anywhere in you. Just a light touch where you feel some movement of your own breath. I'm going to bring my hand a little bit up so maybe you can see it. And how does that feel? Does that touch, you touching yourself, does it change your breathing? And while you are feeling that touch, can you also feel other places where you perceive movement of your breath? And maybe some places where you don't feel any movement of your breath. Again, just notice. And now, just simply taking your hand away, what happens in you? Does anything change in your breathing? How does your hand, the hand that touched you, how does that feel? Is there any breathing in your hand, this hand that touched you, breath? And how does your other hand feel, the one that did not touch? They might feel very different, they might feel the same. Whatever is your experience, just honoring it. And now, can you take your other hand, and if there's another place, or maybe the same place if you wish, you want to touch a place of breathing in you, just allow that touch to happen. And how does that feel? Does this other hand touch differently? Is the movement of your breath in this second place, is it different than the other place? And maybe while you are touching here, where else in you do you feel any movement of your breath? Is there any on your back? Or maybe where you're sitting. We focused a bit on sitting a few minutes ago. Is there any breathing around your sitting area? And then when it feels right to you, just again, very simply taking your hand away. And what are you feeling now? What is your experience of yourself? I wonder if there's anyone who would like to say anything about your experience.
So if anybody would like to type in a response, I will track your questions and answers and responses here. Um, and I see that we're having some um, it seems that our participants are not given the option to turn on their camera here. I'm not sure why that is. So I'm not sure we'll be able to see folks, but hopefully they will write in any responses or questions they're having here and get to interact with you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so for anybody who'd be willing to type in either something that you noticed um, or something that you would like to explore further.
Actually, one thing I didn't mention in just talking about the work is that it's really difficult to put words together with sensing or even feelings. So I'm not surprised. Shall I continue on with maybe another exploration?
Sure, and if it turns out we start to have some responses, then I will weave those in the next opportunity.
Okay. I see, if I'm seeing correctly, that there's one or two questions there, and I want to make sure that we honor the questions that came in earlier.
Yes, so those were about your volume, and that was rectified with you leaning forward. And I see we have a question here in the chat box
Mhm.
from Danny Holklutner. I hope I'm pronouncing that almost right. Danny from SBGI. She's saying, I have always noticed how hard it is to observe something without changing it.
Yeah, that's true. We're alive. Everything's alive. We observe something and it changes. Yes. Uh, I wouldn't suggest that we try to not change it because we're changing every moment. It's hard enough to just stay up to snuff with ourselves, the pace. So yes, if you're noticing that, you're really, really, tuning in to what's happening. Yes. Mhm. Yeah. So let me suggest something else because that breathing is, really subtle too. But I'm guessing that most of us have been sitting while we've been for this past little bit more than a half hour. So I suggest that we just come up to standing. I hope the earphones will stay, but just come up to standing. I don't know about you, but I'm relieved to take the pressure off of my buttocks because that's been a long time. And let's come back to sitting. So we do that many, many times during the day. We sit, we stand, we sit again, we stand again. Now let's come to standing again, but this time let's do it more slowly, really more slowly. See what happens. How do we come to standing? What do we have to do to leave the sitting? What happens first? And when we were sitting, I asked about, oh, our weight. Um, how does your weight feel now? Where do you feel the weight now? And how is your breathing now? Danny says it's hard to observe something without changing it. It's also challenging to be aware of more than one thing, too. Can I be aware of the weight on my feet and also my breathing and also the movement that I went through? So let's come back slowly. Let's come back to sitting. Hmm. So is your sitting the same as it was before? Is your breathing the same as it was before? How do we come from sitting to standing? What happens first? You know, we explored this when we were infants. And if we didn't feel it, we probably wouldn't have, made much progress. And here we are, many years later. So let's come up to standing again, but much more slowly. So what happens first? Is it a movement of your muscle or your weight or your breathing? What is it and where does it go? How do you go through the process of coming to standing? And when does the weight change from one part of you to another part of you? And were you breathing? Were you aware of your breathing? You probably were breathing, but were you aware of your breathing? Did it tell you anything? And how does your standing feel now? Do you feel balanced? We could go on and just shift our weight and see how standing on one leg feels. And what does that do to my breathing? Actually, it did something to my mouth that I was not aware of. Now coming back to center. How does your breathing feel and your weight feel as you shift your weight to your other leg? Is that different? Or is it the same? How is my breathing as I stand on one leg? And how is it when I come back to center and stand on two legs? And now, if you don't mind to close your eyes, let's come back to sitting with our eyes closed. We might be sensing things differently with our eyes closed. Are you sitting? Are we finished coming down to sitting? And how does our sitting feel now? How does your breathing feel now? Do you feel any breathing in your back? the places that you feel the movement of your breath, are they different now? And what happens as you allow your eyes to open? Let it happen slowly if you can. Just noticing what happens as colors and light come into you. Does your breathing change? Does your sitting change? Do you change in any way? And how are you now? So now with this sitting and breathing, let's see if there's anyone who would like to share their experience.
As we invite participants to write in your responses, any questions you might have, Sheila asked a few minutes ago about, well, she responded that she was really enjoying the rhythm of your voice and enjoying the moment, being led by your voice. And she had a question about how to move deeper. And then you led us through this awareness of standing and sitting and coming back into that process more intentionally. So I'm wondering, Sheila, if you have anything more you want to ask or say about that question. And I'll say that Robert Pomonis has said wider vision, coming back with wider vision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not seeing more questions or responses at the moment. So maybe we can spend a moment on wider vision and your experience of that, Judith.
Vision is very important and a very hard thing for us to work with because we use, all of us in this modern society, we use our eyes violently in a way, using them way ahead of where we are. So to spend some time um, just being with our eyes or closing our eyes, which that little bit that happened with Robert, wider vision, I'm reminded of Wilhelm Reich's work and the blockages, and the eye block is one of the strongest ones and one of the earliest ones and one of the most important ones for us to work with. And sometimes just closing your eyes as we did, as Robert finds, or even just putting your hand over your eyes. But it's a big, big place to work. We work with, in my long time workshops, we close our eyes and keep them closed for a half a day. And encourage our other senses to come out rather than just doing it all with our eyes. Someone else says something. Mm-hmm. Should I read it or?
Would you like to read that since it's showing up for you?
Okay. Aware of forward weight shift with inhale, then exhale with more effort required to stand up slowly, feeling more grounded with slow stand and also more full breath upon returning to sitting. Beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, we get up, we stand up how many times a day, and how many times do we feel it? Not much. So this is very simple work, and I think it's very profound. It can go very, very deep. I'm prejudiced. Mhm. I'm also looking at time, Karen. I want to make sure we get to those questions. And are there other questions there, or is that what happened on the chat thing?
Those are the remarks that have come in on the chat.
Mhm.
We have Irene who says that she can't see you now. I wonder if you were to click on gallery view on your Zoom panel, and that will allow everybody who does have a camera coming in. You don't need to change anything, Judith, but I think that maybe Irene, if you click on gallery view, that will allow you to see everybody. Probably what happened was you had it on maybe speaker view, and because I unmuted myself, I took up the screen. So see if you can, on the top right part of your Zoom panel, click on gallery view, and that should allow Judith's beautiful face to be on the screen there for you. So yeah, so it is 4:48, and we have about 12 minutes left of our schedule time, and I'm okay to be here longer if it turns out that we have folks wanting more clarification and time with you. Um, but we can also start to wind things down if people are feeling complete. So I'm wanting to make sure that those of you who are out there and doing your own experiments have an opportunity to explore with Judith while you have her live, because that's so delicious.
I do have time to, I can stay longer too. So should I be speaking now?
Well, I'm wondering if you want to say a little bit more just about any of the either the feedback that's coming in here or how you ground that in your experience when you're leading people.
Well, actually, I would like to give one example of someone I worked with, which seems it's so timely. Um, I've worked with two young boys, about 9 years old. And the first one is the one I want to talk about. His father called me and said that his son was addicted to screens, which is very, very common nowadays. He had become afraid of the dark. And because he was afraid of the dark, he wouldn't get up at night to go to the bathroom. So he started wetting his bed at age 9. So the father was sleeping in the room with the son, trying to wake him up at night and trying to get him over there. And this was not a good situation. The father was not happy. And it was so interesting. And I think it's very, very common. I was going to say young people. No, many of us at different ages, we really lose ourselves to these to these machines. And it was clear that this little boy he was just into his whatever it was, whether it was an iPad or the video game. And he really didn't have any sense of himself. So I we worked with sensory awareness. I had him stand up, I had him jump, feel his feet on the ground, stomp his feet, um, touch his arms, and touch himself. He was pretty stunned with it all. And it was a very simple, 50-minute sensing session. And the father contacted me a week or so later and said he was very, very improved, but he still couldn't make it all the way to the bathroom. He got halfway. So he came back again, and we worked on his walking, taking a step, feeling that foot, the other step, feeling that foot, feeling it. And I also had him do it holding on, but with his eyes closed because it might be in the dark or something, although they did have lights. And after that, he just sort of got back into his body and haven't heard from them since. So I think that was a quick and something that we can all be aware of. There's so many people are going through situations like that. That's one example that Elsa Gindler, Charlotte Silver, I mean, no therapists, neither of them were therapists, but a lot of us are using. Reich would have liked that.
And I imagine that for folks who are working clinically in any capacity or are identified as body workers, that to have some sort of a intentional transition where you're inviting the client or, to make contact with themselves is probably not a bad baseline way to end a session. Am I right about that?
Yes. And I'd like to um, add something to that because I do know that in many states, maybe all of them, it's not necessarily legal to touch your client unless you have some authorization. Massage license would be the least, or some other license. And over the years, I worked a lot on touch and the different qualities of touch and the different experiences of touch. And I did a lot of that exploration in sensory awareness classes at SBGI. And I mean, they different kinds of touch have different kinds of, different qualities, and it brings us to different places in us. And after a long while, I have come to um, encouraging people, leading them in a session to touch themselves. And I find that it does a lot of things. I mean, sometimes it's really important that they get the support and touch of another person, the connection, but sometimes it's even more important that they can make that connection for themselves and know that they can have that support anytime they need. So um, I would like to encourage a lot of therapists who feel they cannot touch, you can still work with touch. I wonder, looking at the time, if we should go with the questions.
Okay. Well, so we were having some technical questions come in here about just being on this format. And so we're sorting that out. We have Chester Howard wanting to check in and say hi to you.
Hi,
I'm guessing
Chester.
that's someone maybe you've known from a previous life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, with our time left, are folks wanting to ask more questions or give more responses that Judith can enrich with her responses herself? Um, Anything that folks are wanting to know about how you might bring some of this inquiry and invitation into your own work in different settings,
Mm.
or how you might use this for yourself at home? So Danny here is saying, I work with my client on building a somatic vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that's something that comes up in sensory awareness inclusion
Mm-hmm.
sessions as well. Is there anything you suggest to add for this? Danny wants to know.
Well, I would love to, if we had the chance to talk, I'd love to know more about the somatic vocabulary that your clients build. That might be very, very different for different people. Mhm. Yeah.
Danny, do you have anything you want specifically, either a process that you would want more clarification on, or if there might be a specific situation you're thinking of that Judith could respond to for you?
Uh-huh. Working with people who really do not have a sense of themselves, um, is there a best place to start? Or is starting anywhere the best? Yeah, anywhere, anywhere. And for instance, when I started today, I thought, oh, maybe breathing is a little bit too subtle to start with on this computerized something or other. So um, just moving or taking a step or anything is a good, anywhere is really the best. And it depends on the person. You might want to ask, I might ask the client, okay, where do you want to start? Or where would you like to pay attention? Or where would you like to feel yourself? Or where would you like to touch yourself? And Michelle, thank you, Michelle, for your comment. In SE training and a physical therapist. Yes, yes. I have to say something that I want to remember before we end, because just before we got on whatever this is, online or whatever, I read the write-up that I did, and I want to change one of the sentences. I said, if we do not experience our own feelings, how can we relate to the feelings of others? And I thought, why do I do that? If we do not experience our own feelings, how can we relate to others feeling theirs? Is much more important and much more real, I would think.
Very subtle yet
Yeah,
profound.
it is. It is subtle and profound. So there were 3 questions, and I want to honor them because they came in early. That Linda sent to me.
So some of them were technical about trying to be able to hear you better and wanting to be able to be on camera with you. And I'm not sure what our limitations were about that. I am unaware of why this particular room was not letting people be on camera with you. So there was some appreciation coming from Sheila Rubin about enjoying your voice and the movement and wanting to go deeper. I'm not sure, Sheila, if you had more about that now that you've gotten to explore a little bit more with Judith. About how to go deeper, or maybe how to help your clients go deeper. Let's see if there's more. And Danny was sharing appreciation here in the end of our comments as well. I think you've given us a nice little appetizer for your demonstration work at the conference that will be coming up at Pacifica. And for those of you that are thinking about coming, Judith will be flying in from Tokyo to come and lead demonstration work. And so you'll all have the opportunity to interact with her and be led through some explorations for yourself without any hurry, without needing to do it across the screen, but instead really be fully embodied in the room with Judith. So I'm wondering if there's anything more about your demonstration that will be happening at the conference, or other work that you might want to summarize here, Judith?
Well, since the conference is in November, I have no idea what I will do, except this is a base of it. I focus a lot on breath and energy and weight. I mean, the realities that we deal with in the world. I don't, and it will be, yeah, it was frustrating for me also not to be able, although your face is lovely, Karen, it would have been nice to have been able to see some others. And I do take a lot of, I just, take off of that. So I have no idea what we'll do.
From my experience with you, reading the room and sensing what was appropriate to come next, I experienced personally the lifespan work that you do and the safety of going back into very early material and making contact with that material, as well as moving forward from that place and out into the world with a deeper sense of safety in that vulnerability in the body. And I remember very distinctly the encouragement for us to have our hands on our hips and our pelvis as we were walking, to experience that movement and where it starts, and how we can be more intentional about being in the hips and traveling down into our legs. And I remember experiencing being rooted like an oak tree in your presence, that was just the natural way to be when being co-regulated by your nervous system in proximity. And feeling a very full exhale in particular, as the body really slowed down and the breath really slowed down, and the mind got quieter and there were larger gaps between the thoughts. And that's a similar experience for me as being on a long-term meditation retreat, where there's permission to withdraw the senses from the world and instead really land within and stay with the natural rhythms as cells are being born and dying, and just experiencing that and not being worried about evaluating it.
Experiencing ourselves is quite a big deal.
It's a very big deal. And it's a blessing to be invited back in, because the world so often calls us out. So,
Mhm.
so we still have 17 folks here live. I'm wondering if anybody has anything more that you are needing or wanting. So we have somebody with a beautiful Japanese writing, it looks like. Hi, Judith.
Oh,
This is a beautiful spring morning in Tokyo, and I thank you for inviting such a sincere contact with my being this hectic time of the day.
great. Beautiful. Uh-huh.
Beautiful,
Mhm.
beautiful.
So, Karen, I still feel that these three questions that were sent by Linda, that you got them earlier, may I speak to
Um,
them just briefly?
so you might have something that I don't have. The ones that, what, do you have some questions that are showing up on your end?
No, they came. Linda sent me an email. But
Oh, oh, oh,
basic,
oh. So I'm speaking to Buddha nature or personality, and how it is that education might actually
mhm,
decrease vitality. Would you start there?
yes, because that was in my write up. So the question was at the beginning of the webinar description, I mentioned how education might diminish some of our vitality. I'd love to say something about that because it's really a strong feeling I have. In the modern day schools, the average, not all of them, of course, we are taught so much. We're taught so much, but we're not allowed the time to find out for ourselves. The word educate means to pull out, not to clobber onto, which which is I see happening. My grandchildren go to one of these super duper STEM schools. And so I called my son this morning and said, okay, science, T is what? Technology? And I said, engineering is English? He said, no, no. E is English? He said, no, it's engineering. Oh, God, engineering. And then math. And I really, I mean, they have 1/2 hour per class. I personally don't think that's time enough for a young person to settle into really getting something or really feeling something, to absorb it. So that makes me unhappy, and I'm not surprised when I see what's happening to the children and they grow and they're nervous wrecks. We had to work hard to become so nervous. They're getting it really early. So that's what I'm saying by education. Some of education really does diminish our vitality. And the second question was, I said that sensory awareness is the practice of becoming more aware of ourselves. And how do I define ourselves? The question was personality or Buddha nature, all of it. Our whole being, you get to choose what you are and who you are. I prefer to make no divisions. I prefer to meet a person as a person, and hopefully I can meet them as fully as I can, and none of us are doing it fully, and there's no judgment. We just do what we can. But putting other names onto it, although Buddha nature is a good one, might make it difficult. And then a similar question, how do you distinguish between an energetic experience and sensory experience? And when might you value using one over the other to connect with one's authenticity? Wow, what a question. There are so many different possibilities of energetic experiences, and I don't choose one over the other. In a therapeutic situation, I try to keep them together, and I try to work again. This might be boring, but with as much of the whole person as I can. But there are so many other energetic experiences, shamans, yogis, substances, all sorts of things. But I was thinking about this saying, boy, that's not going to be a very satisfying answer. But then I thought, what about the energetic experience of touching a hot plate? And the response is pulling your hand away really, really quickly. Well, it was the sensing of that heat that got you to move, wasn't it? So I don't separate. Energetic and sensing. I think they really, really go together. Hopefully, I would love to experience all of my energy because as I get older, it gets harder sometimes. So those are the responses that I have to those three questions, which were great questions. So thank you, people. Oh, I see.
Yes,
There it is.
beautiful. Those
Mhm.
came in before your talk several days ago. So
Right,
there were folks that
right.
were thinking ahead, and
Mhm.
and probably about their own experience, as well as how to facilitate for people that they're serving and just going through their day-to-day life. So you have some appreciations coming in here at the end. Are there any further responses or questions that anybody might have in order to get your fill here this evening, or this morning as it were in Tokyo?
Tomorrow morning it is.
Right.
I can say, you said that my website address was on. I don't see it, but I have some articles I've written. And one of them is co-written with two other men from EABP, and it's Wilhelm Reich or Elsa Gindler and her influence on body psychotherapy. But there are also other articles just about the simple, and a couple of videos about sensory awareness. So if anyone is interested or would like to do more, you're very welcome.
Wonderful. So I have shared your email address again here in the chat box, which I encourage folks to write down: Judith with a Y, Weaver.com. And we can also make sure to have that posted with the recording of your webinar here for folks that are going to be accessing this after the live session.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just have to say, my father could not spell. That is not my affectation. It causes a lot of confusion, but that's what it is.
Oh, it also makes you unique. So thank you so much for being willing to demonstrate, in spite of the technological imposition, how it is to be led through a sensory awareness exploration and inquiry, and to come into the breath and the movement with intention and attention, and for being able to offer your rich responses to feedback and questions from our membership here, and your friends around the world. So if we don't have any more needs or questions now, I'll stay on here for another minute in case anything comes in, but I'm going to guess that if you've had a question or response, you've maybe already typed it in or let us know that, and have gotten what you needed for tonight. So we will thank all of you for coming live and being willing to come into your senses with Judith. And we hope that we'll see you at the conference so you can have more time with Judith, more uninterrupted time.
That would be fun.
Well, my Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, thank you for spoiling me again with more time with you.
Oh, thank you for your support. I could not have done this on my own.
Well, you're a trooper for putting up with all of these different tools that people are needing to use these days in order to have access to you. So thank you, dear. And if more questions come in after the recording, I'll check in with you about those.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much to everybody for coming, for tuning in. And thank you so much, Linda and Karen and Chris.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Linda, for hosting us. You still there, my dear? She's muted still.
I am here.
There you are.
Thanks a lot, Linda.
You bet. All right, everybody, have a great night.
Thanks.
You too.